Feasted. All right, Reddit. Grab some popcorn and strap in. This is going to be intense.
My name's Cole.
30 years old and am a journeyman lineman for the Regional Power Company, if you don't know what that means.
Freezing.
I'm the guy who climbs 40-foot poles in the middle of a freezing ice storm just to get your lights back on. I'm the guy who pulls 16-hour shifts during hurricanes while everyone else is frantically evacuating.
I'm the guy.
Who makes sure the hospitals don't go dark and grandma's oxygen machine keeps pumping through the night. It's not a glamorous life. The hours are brutal and the conditions are downright dangerous. But it pays well.
Huge.
Good at it.
I've been doing this for 8 years now.
I grew up in a small town about 2 hours north of here. My dad was a mechanic who worked on heavy diesel engines until his back finally gave out.
You.
My mom was an ER nurse who worked the night shift so she could be home when we got off school. They taught me that you judge a man by what he does, not by what he says. Show up. Work hard. Keep your word.
Complain.
Fix what's broken. I took that advice to heart. By 28, I owned my house outright, paid in cash. 3 bedrooms, a decent yard, and a detached garage where I rebuilt motorcycles on the weekends.
Zero debt.
A solid retirement account, and enough savings to weather a year without working. Then I met Blair. She was 26 when we crossed paths at a mutual friend's cookout. She was beautiful without even trying.
Pruned hair.
Piercing green eyes, and a laugh that made you want to keep saying stupid things just to hear it again. She worked as an events coordinator for a boutique hotel downtown,
Things.
planning corporate retreats and wedding receptions. She had that polished, professional vibe going on. We talked for 3 hours that first night, standing by the fire pit, while everyone else got loud and distracted.
For her number.
She gave it to me without playing any games. I really liked that. It seemed like she had her head on straight.
Nicewood.
What I didn't know was that she was 6 months out of a 2-year relationship with a guy named Preston. Preston was the kind of guy who wore expensive boat shoes without socks and talked incessantly about his personal brand. He came from old money, worked at his daddy's investment firm, and treated women like accessories to be swapped out when he got bored. He cheated on Blair repeatedly, gaslit her whenever she confronted him,
Fixed.
and eventually dumped her when she demanded accountability, telling her she was too needy and too dramatic. He said she wasn't sophisticated enough for his circle.
Fenchy.
The breakup wrecked her confidence and left her finances in ruins. Because she'd been covering his expensive lifestyle while he pocketed his trust fund distributions. Blair was a total mess when I met her, but she hid it well.
Underneath that put-together
Exterior was a woman with maxed out credit cards totaling about $19,000, a car payment she could barely make, and a self-esteem that had been stomped flat by a guy with a Napoleon complex.
ease.
She was living in a cramped studio apartment she could barely afford, trying to look successful while drowning in debt. I didn't know any of that at first. I just knew I liked her. And apparently, she liked me too.
Thinned.
Or at least, she liked what I could do for her. Our first year together was great. Really great. She seemed genuinely into me. She'd come to my house on weekends and watch me work on bikes in the garage,
Being.
asking questions about the engines, even though I could tell she didn't care about motorcycles. She'd pack me lunches when I had early shifts with little notes tucked inside. She met my parents and charmed them completely.
Thingson.
My mom loved her, and my dad said she seemed like good people. I trusted their judgment. When she finally told me about her debt about 3 months into the relationship, I didn't run. I didn't judge her.
Fenced-in.
I sat down with her at my kitchen table and made a plan. I paid off her credit cards in one shot, refinanced her car loan into my name to get her a better rate since her credit was trashed,
From.
and helped her build a budget that actually worked. Within 8 months, she was debt-free for the first time in her adult life. I didn't hold it over her. That's not why I did it.
Feason.
I did it because I loved her and I wanted us to have a solid foundation. When you're building something together, you don't keep score at least. That's what I thought. After a year of dating, she moved into my house.
Fence.
Her lease was up, I had the space, and she was spending most nights at my place anyway. She gave up her studio, packed her things into my truck, and moved in. She didn't pay rent. I didn't ask her to.
You then.
The house was paid off. What was I going to do? Charge her to live with me? She covered groceries sometimes, split the utilities, and handled the streaming subscription since I didn't care about that stuff.
It worked. 6 months after she moved in.
I proposed on a hike to her favorite overlook at sunset. I carried that ring in my pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. She cried, said yes,
You.
and told me I was everything Shed ever wanted. I thought I'd found my person. That's when things started to shift. The engagement seemed to flip a switch in Blair's brain.
First.
Little things I could explain away. She started caring more about the wedding than about us. Every conversation became about venues, flowers, color schemes, and seating charts.
Fend.
I'd come home from a 12-hour shift covered in mud and sweat, and Shed shove a tablet in my face, asking me to choose between two shades of white that looked identical to my exhausted eyes. I'd say they looked the same.
Fungston. And Shed.
Get frustrated, saying I wasn't taking this seriously. The wedding planning kicked into high gear about 2 months after the engagement.
Fagged.
Blair found a venue. She loved some converted barn outside the city that charged more per hour than I made in a week. I told her we should look at some other options, maybe something more within our budget.
When the max started to slip.
She looked at me like I was a stranger. She told me that her dream day shouldn't be compromised because of my blue-collar salary. I was stunned.
Being.
I had provided the home she lived in and the freedom from debt she enjoyed, but suddenly, I was the one holding her back. Then came the wedding invitations. She was planning a small private ceremony, or so she told me.
Voodoo.
But then I found out she was sending invites to people. ID never met friends from her old life, coworkers, even some of the people who knew Prieston. When I asked her about it, she got defensive.
Feud.
She said, I wouldn't understand the social obligations of her career. The final straw came a week ago. One of her friends was getting married, and I asked her if we were going. She looked at me, cold as ice, and said,
Friends, think. You're a downgrade from my ex. It's better if you stay home.
I just nodded, feeling a strange, hollow silence settle in my chest. When she left, I didn't argue. I simply canceled everything.
Fold.
The venue, the caterer, the photographer, all the deposits I had paid with my own money. I retracted. Then, I packed every single one of her things. I put her clothes, her books,
You.
her trinkets into boxes, and set them on the curb. A few hours later, her mom called me, screaming about how I was a monster for ruining her daughter's big day and humiliating her by putting her stuff out.
Thinked.
I listened to her rant for a minute. Then I said, Ma'am, your daughter called me a downgrade. She's the one who decided she wanted to be someone I couldn't provide for. I hung up, blocked her number,
You.
and walked into my garage to work on my bike. I'm alone tonight, but for the first time in a long time, the house feels quiet and mine again. I paid for my peace, and I think it's the best money I've ever spent.
All right, Reddit. Fend.
Grab your coffee. This story is a long time coming, and honestly, it's about time I put it all out there. My name is Cole, and for the longest time, I thought I was building a life with the woman of my dreams.
Ease.
But, as it turns out, I was just a character in a play. I didn't know I was starring in, written by people who wanted me off the stage. It all started when the wedding planning went into high gear about 2 months after the proposal.
Frungstes.
Blair found a venue she absolutely adored. It was some converted barn outside the city that charged more per hour than I made in an entire week of hard, dangerous work. We put down a $5,000 deposit money.
Vigner.
I had worked overtime for her parents. Gerald and Meredith matched it because they insisted on contributing. Gerald, her dad, seemed genuinely happy to chip in. Meredith, however,
Filzen.
acted like she was doing us a massive favor just by letting her money touch our peasant wedding. The caterer, the florist, and the photographer followed in quick succession. Her parents covered about $8,000 total.
Covered every single cent of the rest.
We set the date for the following spring, 10 months out, and for a moment, I thought we were actually building a foundation. Then her friends got involved. Specifically,
You I came.
to call the Poison Twins, Kendall and Aubrey. They been Blairs, friends since college, part of some sorority sisterhood that apparently created bonds and strong common sense or basic human decency. They hated me from day one, and they didn't bother hiding it behind fake smiles. Kendall was a real estate agent who sold overpriced, hollow condos to tech bros and honestly believed that made her a mogul.
BMW that was definitely leased and dressed.
Like she was perpetually on her way to a yacht party that didn't exist. Aubrey worked in pharmaceutical sales and had the personality of a root canal. Fake as anything.
Feed, and twice as painful.
The first time I met them at some overpriced lounge. Downtown, Kendall looked me up and down like a piece of dirt on her shoe. So, you're the electrician Blair's been talking about? She asked, her voice dripping with condescension. I corrected her calmly, stating I was actually a lineman. She let out this high-pitched, screeching laugh that made my skin crawl and said, "Same thing, right?"
You both just play with wires.
I let it go, because Blair was sitting right there, and I didn't want to cause a scene. Looking back, I should have burned that bridge down right then and there.
Fission.
I should have told Kendall that the difference between a lineman and an electrician is like the difference between a real estate agent and someone who actually builds the houses they sell. But I kept my mouth shut.
Yushi.
I tried to be the bigger person. That was my first major mistake. Over the next few months, those two worked on Blair like termites on a wooden foundation.
Ekem.
Every time she came back from brunch with them, and there was always brunch, she was a little more distant, a little more critical, a little more focused on what I didn't have instead of what I was giving.
You.
She started making backhanded comments about my job. She asked if I had ever thought about moving into management, something with normal office hours and clean clothes. I told her. I liked what I did. I was good at it.
Excellent. And the union pension was rock solid.
Shed just sigh and say she knew.
Fingshi.
But that it would be nice to have a husband who didn't smell like transformer oil and come home looking like he'd lost a fight with a mud pit. Then came the comparisons.
Used.
Shed mentioned how Kendall's boyfriend just made partner at his law firm, how Aubrey's fiancé was taking her to Santorini for their engagement photos. And then there was Preston. Oh yeah, she started bringing him up again.
Preston.
Just bought a condo downtown in that new building with the rooftop pool. Isn't that nice for him? Shed asked, her eyes gleaming with a strange expectation. I'd grunt and say good for him, but inside, I was keeping a tally of the cracks in our relationship. My buddy Deacon saw it happening long before I did. Deacon's been my best friend since high school wed, worked summer jobs together, got into trouble together,
Grew up together.
He's a welder now, owns his own fabrication shop, looks like a biker with the beard and the tattoos, but talks like a philosophy professor when he's had enough coffee.
Zero filter.
And had been skeptical of Blair from the start, calling her a fixer-upper when I first introduced them. But he kept his mouth shut because he respected my choices. Deacon met the Poison Twins exactly once.
ID.
Made the mistake of organizing a dinner with both friend groups, thinking everyone would find common ground. Within 20 minutes, Kendall had asked Deacon what kind of car he drove. He said, "A truck," she asked.
Fix. What year?
He looked her dead in the eye and said, "It runs." She didn't know what to do with that, so she just stared at her salad. Aubrey then tried to ask him about his investment strategy. Deacon just shrugged and said his strategy was not being broke. They stopped talking to him after that and spent the rest of the night whispering to Blair in corners. On the drive home, Deacon looked at me and said, "Man,
Thin. Those two are going to be a problem. I told him they were harmless.
He shook his head and replied, "Nah, they're scorekeepers. Everything is as a competition to them. And right now,"
Fingshi.
looking at Blair and wondering why he's not winning. I didn't get what he meant at the time. About 3 months before everything blew up, Deacon and I were fishing at his cabin up north.
One of those perfect October days where the air smells like wood smoke, and the fish are actually biting.
We'd been out there since dawn, not talking much, just enjoying the quiet. Around noon, Deacon cracked open a drink, stared at the water for a long time, and finally said, "You know your girl's changing, right?" I sighed. "She's just stressing about the wedding. Everyone does." He shook his head slowly. "Nah, man.
Makes you tired. Snappy. Maybe.
Whatever's going on with her is something else. She looks at you like you're a problem she's got to figure out instead of someone she actually wants to be with."
Enan.
I told him he was being paranoid and that he'd never liked her anyway. He cast his line out into the water and watched it sink. "I liked who she was when you met her," he said quietly. "But this version's got an audience."
Eadman.
I should have listened. I didn't. Fast forward to the day things finally imploded. Our mutual friends Danielle and her fiancé Trevor were getting married at a fancy venue outside the city. Blair had been friends with Danielle since college, part of that same social circle that included the Poison twins. Dot. Known Trevor, through work, he was a line foreman who'd moved up to management a few years back.
BD.
He was a good guy, down to earth, and I was actually looking forward to the wedding. I thought it might be good for Blair and me to be around a happy couple and remind us what we were working toward. ID rented a nice
Tux saved.
scrubbed the grease from my fingernails for 3 days straight, and felt ready to show up for her. But when we arrived, I realized something was off. Blair wouldn't look at me. She kept checking her phone.
Glancing toward the entrance every 5 minutes.
Then I saw him, Preston. He walked in looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad, and suddenly the room felt much colder.
Face.
Lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. It wasn't just a friendly greeting, it was relief. She left my side without a word, walking over to him as if I were nothing more than a ghost. I stood there by the bar,
Eerie feet.
a drink in my hand, watching them talk. Kendall and Aubrey were hovering nearby, laughing and casting glances in my direction. It hit me then, not like a punch, but like a slow, freezing realization.
You wasn't a partner.
I was a placeholder. I was the guy you keep around until the upgraded version shows up. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't flip a table or scream. Instead, I walked over to the wedding planner,
Few.
found out where the gifts were being kept, and realized something even more sinister. I saw Blair whispering to the Poison twins, and I saw her pull out a small velvet box that definitely didn't contain my engagement ring.
He was returning my ring, the one it saved 6 months for to get something else.
I walked up to her, tapped her on the shoulder, and watched the color drain from her face. I didn't yell. I just leaned in and whispered,
Thinked.
"I think you've got someone else you need to be talking to." The look of pure, unadulterated shock on her face was almost worth the pain. But the real kicker, I had already handled the finances.
Fen.
I had contacted the caterer and the venue earlier that week, knowing something was wrong, and I had quietly moved the deposit refunds into a separate account under my name only. Dot. Her parents had contributed.
Fend.
But because of the legal contract it had drawn up for the venue, the money stayed with the primary signee. Me. Dot. As I walked out of that wedding, I didn't look back. I left her there, surrounded by her friends, that the man she thought was a lineman had just outplayed her entire game. I didn't just walk away from a bad relationship. I walked away with my dignity, my savings, and a hard-earned lesson.
Fee.
The Poison twins could keep their condoliving, yatched, dreaming, fake smiling. Life.
No.
I had my truck, my career, and for the first time in a long time, my peace. That night, I sat at Deacon's shop, drank a beer.
Finally understood what he meant.
I was never winning because I was playing a game I wasn't meant to win. But the funny thing about life is, when you stop trying to keep up with people who don't respect you,
You weren't behind at all.
you were just on a different path entirely. Justice isn't always a dramatic shout sometimes. It's just the quiet sound of a door closing behind you,
You knowledge.
that you're finally free. The next day, I got a text from Blair. "Where did the money go? My parents are furious." I didn't even bother replying. I just blocked the number, blocked the twins,
Fear.
and went to work. The wire was humming, the sun was rising, and for the first time in years, the air didn't smell like a trap. It smelled like a new beginning. All right, Reddit, listen up. Is a story about how quickly the mask slips when you realize you're just a placeholder in someone else's social climbing game.
Dot. I'm Cole.
I spent 9 hours in a bucket truck during an ice storm,
Fink.
struggling to restore power to a nursing home where the elderly were shivering in the dark. My hands were raw, I was dehydrated, and I was covered in 10 pounds of frozen grime and sweat,
Fing.
expecting nothing more than a hot shower and a bed. What I got instead was Blair sitting on the couch with that specific sharp look on her face, with one that usually signals a storm is coming.
Fishin.
I dropped my heavy gear bag by the door, exhausted. I asked her what was wrong. She stared at Tammy, her face unreadable, and said we needed to talk. She started with the long,
Winding preamble.
the classic setup people use when they know they're about to drop a bomb. She talked about Daniel's wedding, the guest list, the venue capacity, and vague concerns from her friends about the vibe of the reception.
Frowned.
I didn't have a clue what she was getting at. I'd met her friends before, and they'd seemed perfectly fine. I told her to just get to the point. She took a shaky breath and looked away. Kendall and Aubrey, those two.
Fings.
They thought it would be better if I didn't attend. It would be uncomfortable, she claimed. She added that Preston would be there, and it might be awkward. I stared at her for a long, silent moment.
Asked her why.
Preston's presence had anything to do with my attendance. She stumbled over her words, saying it was complicated. She claimed her social circle worried about tension,
Finked.
suggesting Preston was a better fit for their group, and that it would be weird to have her fiancé around when everyone was so familiar with her ex. I kept my voice dangerously level.
Fiented.
I asked if her brilliant plan to avoid drama was to uninvite her own fiancé to a wedding just to keep her ex-boyfriend comfortable. She immediately went on the defensive, claiming I was twisting her words.
He insisted.
It wasn't about Preston, but about the group dynamic. She told me I wouldn't fit in, that I wouldn't have anything to talk about with the other guests, and frankly, she thought her friends were right.
Fact.
That was the moment the scale fell from my eyes. It wasn't about protecting my feelings. It was about her being deeply, pathetically ashamed of me. I asked her point blank. Are you ashamed of me? She hesitated.
Then gave me the standard empty.
No, of course not. I told her that was interesting. She got snappy, asking if I was mad. I told her I wasn't mad, he was thankful, because she'd finally cleared the air.
He told me not to take it personally, which was the final straw.
I asked her how else I was supposed to take it when Shed just admitted she was embarrassed to be seen with her own fiancé. She started screaming that I was being dramatic, that I was twisting everything. Then the truth came out in a jagged, ugly burst. She yelled that Kendall said I was a downgrade from Preston, and Aubrey agreed. So yes,
He was embarrassed.
the silence that followed was absolute. She realized what Shed said and tried to walk it back, but the damage was irreversible. I told her I understood perfectly. She actually looked relieved,
Finkin.
thinking I was just going to roll over and accept my role as her little shameful secret. She smiled weakly, saying she knew I was practical, and that's what she loved about me. I walked past her toward the bedroom.
That.
She followed me, her heels clicking on the hardwood, demanding to know what I was doing. I pulled a suitcase from the closet and started clearing her dresser drawers. She was losing her mind,
Phasen.
screaming about how I was overreacting. I stopped, set the suitcases down, and looked her in the eye. I told her she had until Thursday to leave. I told her ID put it in writing, and if she made it difficult,
Fee.
the police would be there to handle the removal. She laughed in my face, telling me I couldn't kick her out because it was my house, her words, and she lived there.
Fake she.
Reminded her that she wasn't on the lease and had moved in as a guest, and now that invitation was revoked. The color drained from her face as she realized. I wasn't joking. She asked if I was breaking up with her.
Folder yes.
She started sobbing, calling me cruel and saying it was all a misunderstanding. I had zero patience left. I went to my desk, wrote a formal notice with the date and the Thursday deadline, signed it,
Thing.
and handed it to her. She grabbed my arm, begging me to talk, but I pulled away. Right then, the front door opened, and Deacon walked in. He was there to return a torque wrench for our bike project.
You.
He took one look at her tears and my stone-cold expression and immediately understood the shift in gravity. He asked what he'd missed. I gave him the two-sentence version. Deacon looked at the paper in her hand and nodded. Thee was my witness now. For the next hour, Blair cycled through every tactic, begging, crying, bargaining, and finally, threatening to call the cops.
Deacon just sat there.
And calmly told her she could call whoever she wanted, but the notice was legal and the timeline was reasonable. She was desperate, so she called Kendall and put her on speaker. Kendall started screeching,
Thinked.
calling me a psycho and telling Blair to call the police immediately. I just watched them, feeling a strange sense of clarity. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and for the first time in months,
The air in my own house felt clean.
she thought she was the one in control, holding the cards of social status and proper expectations. She didn't realize that the moment she chose her friend's approval over her partner's dignity, he had already ended the relationship. I didn't need a shouting match. I had the law, I had a witness, and most importantly, I had my self-respect back. She spent that night in the guest room,
Fingin still.
thinking this was a negotiation. She thought that by morning I would soften, that the practical Cole would realize he couldn't live without her. She had no idea that I had already checked out of this relationship the moment she said the word. Downgrade. When Thursday came, she was still trying to play the victim, calling every mutual friend we had to twist the story.
Fenin.
But by then, I had already moved her remaining things to the porch. When the police did eventually show up, because she actually called them, they walked through the house, looked at the papers, and looked at me.
Feud.
They told her. She had 10 minutes to get off the property, and that if she returned, it would be trespassing. Watching the look on her face, as she realized her friends couldn't help her.
Ted and her downgrade fiancé had
Finally grown a backbone, was worth more than any wedding I could have ever attended. Justice isn't always a dramatic explosion. Sometimes, justice is just a closed door, a silent house,
Cane.
and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you never have to be someone's secret again. She left. I changed the locks that afternoon. I still work on my bike with Deacon, and every time I turn a wrench.
Think about how glad I am that the power, quite literally, is back in my hands.
The silence in the living room was so heavy, it felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. Blair stood there, face twisted in a mask of indignation that didn't quite mask the flicker of panic in her eyes. She wasn't a tenant, she was my fiancée, but the dynamic had shifted into something cold and unrecognizable. Without a word,
She pulled out her phone and dialed Kendall.
she put the call on speaker, clearly looking for an audience, a reinforcement of her own twisted reality. Kendall's voice erupted from the tiny speaker.
Screeching about how
I was a textbook psycho, a man spinning out of control, she told Blair to call the police, to report me for abusive behavior, painting me as the villain in her carefully curated drama. Deacon,
think.
who had been standing by the door like a silent sentinel, finally stepped forward. He reached out, took the phone firmly from Blair's trembling hand, and held it to his ear. His voice was steady, devoid of any heat, yet it carried the chilling finality of a closing coffin lid. Hey, this is Deacon, he said, his eyes locking onto Blair's. Shez got until Thursday to get her life out of this house. If you want to play hero,
Face it.
come. Pick her up yourself, otherwise. Stop the screaming. He ended the call before Kendall could utter another syllable and dropped the phone back onto the table. The ring sat on the bathroom counter,
Vent.
a glittering symbol of a promise that had curdled months ago. I walked past Blair, grabbed the small velvet box, and returned to the room. This stays, Seiss said, my voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger.
The engagement is dead.
And this ring goes back to the jeweler. She lunged for it, a desperate animal trying to reclaim a piece of her pride. I stepped back, keeping the box just out of her reach. $8,000.
Healer, I reminded her.
It's not yours anymore. You gave it to me. That makes it mine, she shrieked. I'm returning it tomorrow, I replied, my expression carved from stone. She called me a monster.
Feel the sting of the insult.
Deacon just shrugged, looking at her with a mix of pity and boredom. He gave you until Thursday. That's more than fair. She didn't sleep in the guest room. She spent the night pacing until she finally called her parents. Gerald arrived at midnight, his face showing the deep, tired lines of a man who had seen too much.
We spoke.
Spoke for a few minutes. I laid out the truth. The betrayal, the uninvited guests. He didn't defend her. He didn't argue. He just looked exhausted and nodded. He helped her pack the SUV, his movements heavy and sad.
Bing.
Then they drove away into the dark. Over the next 2 days, she returned twice with her mother, Meredith, to scavenge the rest of her belongings. I stayed out of the way, a ghost in my own home.
Using to engage with their glares or their snide remarks.
Meredith watched me like I was a virus. But I didn't say a word. I didn't offer an excuse. On the second day, Gerald approached me as they finished loading the final boxes. He kept his voice low, a secret shared between two men who understood the cost of a broken home.
For what it's worth,
He said quietly. I get it.
would have done the exact same thing.
I nodded, unable to find the words to thank him for that singular moment of validation. He shook my hand, climbed into the car, and left me in the silence. By Thursday evening, the house was empty, and the air felt clearer, lighter somehow. Blair stood at the edge of my driveway, looking back with eyes full of spite. She told me I would regret this.
Thanked.
That I had discarded my one chance at true happiness. I didn't answer. I didn't even blink. I just watched her drive away, closing the door on that chapter forever. Deacon came over that night, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped behind the horizon. He handed me a drink, a quiet celebration of the end of the war.
You good?
He asked, his voice steady. Yeah, I said, looking out at the yard. I'm actually good.
Morning.
I went to work, but not my usual job. I went to work on the wreckage of the wedding. I pulled up my list. The venue, the caterer, the florist, the DJ, the photographer. One by one, I called them.
Think.
My voice firm, as I explained the event was canceled. Most were professional and sympathetic, offering condolences for the situation. A few tried to push for a postponement, but I cut them off. There was nothing left to save.
Foundation to build upon.
I signed the digital cancellation forms and saved every confirmation email into a folder. The deposits her parents had paid. Gone, non-refundable.
Feud. Zut.
$8,000 turned into dust because their daughter couldn't keep her mouth shut. Meredith called me that afternoon, frantic and furious. I let it go to voicemail, then again, then a third time.
Fields.
When I finally picked up, her voice was a high-pitched weapon. She demanded to know how I could humiliate their family by canceling without consulting them. She talked about Gerald's overtime, their savings,
Family tradition.
I listened to her excuses until she paused for breath. Ask your daughter why she agreed to uninvite me from my own wedding just to please her ex, I said. The line went dead quiet. Have a nice day,
Whispered.
and hung up. She tried to call back 4 times before I finally blocked the number. Next was the car, the final tether to her influence. I texted her. The car is in my name.
Thing until Friday to get your things out.
She responded with a wall of text, a manifesto of blame that I didn't even open. Friday came. The car was still full of her belongings.
Big scene.
So I cleaned it out myself and listed it on Facebook Marketplace. By Saturday morning, I had 3 offers and was meeting a buyer in a grocery store parking lot. I signed over the title, deposited the check,
Then paid off the remaining loan.
then I did the thing that made Deacon nearly choke on his coffee. Our wedding website was still active, a digital shrine to a lie. Blair had designed it.
But I owned the domain and the hosting.
I didn't delete it. I changed the elegant homepage banner to 2 words in bold block letters. Event canceled. No photos, no story, no directions.
You know Zinxie.
Just those 2 words glowing against a white background. Blatter had shared that link everywhere. From her work email signature to the group chats with her friends. Within 24 hours, the rumor mill was screaming.
Everyone who clicked that link was met with a cold, hard truth.
I didn't have to explain a thing, because the website did all the talking for me. The silence of my house was no longer empty, it was finally mine. The rumors, started spreading like wildfire, and honestly, I just let the chaos run its course. Within 24 hours, Blair's entire circle was buzzing with questions. Every one of her friends reached out, demanding answers.
Fides.
And poor Blair found herself trapped in an endless cycle of explaining the unexplainable. Each time she opened her mouth to tell the story, she had to face the brutal reality that our engagement was officially dead. She struggled, trying to decide how much of the ugly truth she dared to reveal to the world. But Danielle had stumbled upon the truth long before anyone else. That same afternoon, just hours after I'd updated the website,
She texted me.
her tone urgent, asking if the rumors swirling around were actually true. I decided to keep it simple, giving her the raw, factual version without any added drama.
Bees.
I told her exactly how Blair had uninvited me from the wedding, all because Kendall and Aubrey decided I was a downgrade compared to Preston. I told her the truth, that Blair had stood by and agreed with them.
Me no choice but to call the whole thing off.
Danielle was absolutely horrified by the revelation. She's explained that Kendall had only offered to help with the guest list as a favor, and she had never once authorized anyone to cut my name from the list. She had genuinely assumed I was coming to celebrate with them. Trevor had been expecting my presence too. She sent a barrage of apologies, sounding truly devastated, and mentioned how she had always viewed Blair and me as the perfect couple. Then she dropped the hammer. She was going to have a serious conversation with Kendall at the rehearsal dinner.
Killed it.
As it turned out, that conversation happened right in front of every single guest. Trevor was feeding me the play-by-play through text messages in real time, painting a vivid picture of the disaster.
Species.
Danielle confronted Kendall in the middle of the room, demanding to know by what authority she had decided who was worthy of attending her wedding. Kendall tried to play the role of the innocent bystander,
Feason.
claiming she was just trying to help and assuming she was doing what Danielle wanted. Danielle wasn't buying a single word of it.
Fees.
She looked Kendall dead in the eye and asked if she had pressured Blair to uninvite me because of Preston. Kendall couldn't deny it, and the entire restaurant fell into a suffocating dead silence.
Ejim.
Danielle made it official then and there. Kendall and Aubrey were stripped of their roles in the wedding party. They were told they could stay for the ceremony as regular distant guests if they truly wished.
Finish standing by her side.
They wouldn't be giving toasts. They wouldn't be in the photos. And they were officially exiled. They left, and they made sure everyone watched them do it.
Feasant.
Aubrey knocked over a centerpiece on her way out, and Kendall shrieked that Danielle was ungrateful and dramatic. The entire restaurant stared as they stormed out like two toddlers throwing a tantrum because they didn't get their way. Preston, who was still somehow on the invite list, just sat there,
Fuse.
looking like he wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear forever. Trevor told me he left shortly after, and he didn't even bother showing up to the actual wedding. The ceremony went on without the Poison twins.
Trevor told me. It was absolutely beautiful.
Danielle looked genuinely happy. They even sent me a piece of wedding cake in a little box, accompanied by a note that said, "Sorry for all the drama. You deserved better."
Thinking.
Deacon and I sat on the couch that Sunday, eating the delicious cake while watching the game, feeling a strange sense of peace. Over the next few days, the full story leaked out, and it was glorious.
Them.
Blair created a backup Instagram account, filling her feed with vague, cryptic posts about toxic masculinity, betrayal, and how people show their true colors when things get hard.
They did.
The comment section was a mess of supportive friends who didn't know the truth, and confused followers asking for context. Her friends rallied around her at first, desperate to play the victim.
Finned.
Kendall posted a massive rant about how Blair had dodged a bullet, talking about how some men just couldn't handle strong, independent women. Aubrey shared it immediately, layering it with fire emojis.
Eason.
But the moment the truth about the rehearsal dinner leaked, the narrative shifted instantly. I didn't have to lift a finger, the rumor mill did the work for me. Blair showed up at my job site 4 days after the wedding. She had clearly been waiting in the yard that morning, watching my crew load up, and then she followed my truck all the way to the site. I hadn't noticed her trailing us, as I was far too focused on the grueling day ahead.
50 feet up.
A utility pole in a quiet neighborhood, working to replace a crossarm that a storm had shredded the night before. I was soaked in sweat, my breath visible in the freezing air.
You.
And I was entirely focused on the mechanics of the job when I heard a commotion echoing from below. My crew lead,
Fela man.
who had been doing this line of work since before I was born, radioed up to ask if I knew the woman currently losing her mind next to my truck. I looked down, squinting against the light.
Fennies.
I saw her car parked illegally in the work zone, and I saw her pacing back and forth like a caged animal. I told Raphael. Yeah, unfortunately, I do. He asked if I wanted him to intervene, but I told him I'd handle it myself. Finished the connection I was working on, secured my tools, and climbed down the pole with deliberate, careful movements. Blair was standing right by my truck when I hit the ground. She looked absolutely wrecked.
Fant?
Her hair was pulled back in a messy, frazzled ponytail, and she was wearing wrinkled yoga pants and a stained t-shirt. She didn't even wait for me to unclip my safety harness before she started. You humiliated me, she spat out.
Her voice cracking with pure desperation.
You absolutely wrecked my reputation. You cost my parents thousands of dollars, and you destroyed my friendships. She glared at me, eyes wild. Are you happy now?
Thingy.
I slowly took off my hard hat and set it in the bed of the truck, refusing to give her the reaction she wanted. I didn't say a word. That was the trigger. She completely lost it.
Fent.
She started screaming about how she had given me everything, how she had lowered herself to be with someone like me, and how her friends had warned her from the start that I wasn't good enough, and yet she had defended me.
Fail.
And the rest of the crew suddenly found the equipment across the street incredibly fascinating. But I knew they were listening to every single word. I just stood there, waiting until she finally ran out of steam and the shouting died down into ragged breaths. Then, I asked her calmly, when exactly did you defend me? She stumbled, saying it wasn't like that.
He had been under immense pressure.
She started rambling about how Kendall and Aubrey had been whispering in her ear for months, telling her she could do so much better,
Feeplen.
and constantly reminding her that Preston was still interested. She admitted that Preston had reached out multiple times. He told her he missed her, that he'd made a huge mistake letting her go, and that he wanted her back.
He claimed
She had been confused. I asked the only question that mattered. Did you text him back? She hesitated, her silence confirming everything I already knew. Yeah, I said, my voice cold. That's exactly what I thought.
you.
She tried to backpedal, saying nothing had happened, that it was just old friends catching up and seeking closure. She insisted she hadn't done anything wrong.
Thanked he.
I didn't argue with her. There was no point in debating someone who lived in a fantasy world. She started sobbing again, the performative kind of crying that she thought would break me. She told me Shed made a mistake.
She loved me, and that she wanted to fix this.
She claimed Shed do anything. She told me her parents were furious, that Kendall and Aubrey had cut ties with her, and that she had absolutely nothing left.
Feed.
I looked at her for a long, long time. I stared at the woman I had once planned to spend the rest of my life with, and for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing at all.
Fiend.
The morning air was thick with the scent of motor oil and sawdust, the kind of air that usually brings me peace. But today, the silence was heavy, broken only by the shivering sobs of Blair standing in my driveway.
Thank
She looked small, disheveled, and for the first time, truly terrified. She whispered that she had nothing left, that her parents were screaming at her, that Kendall and Aubrey had cut her off without a second thought.
you.
She was begging for a bridge I had already burned to the ground. I watched her for a long time, trying to find a trace of the woman I had once promised my life to. This was the same woman who, just weeks ago,
Beaut.
had looked at me with cold, sharp eyes and told me I wasn't enough. I wasn't even angry anymore. The rage had burned out after about 12 hours of staring at the ceiling, wondering where I went wrong. Then,
vision in
hit me like a physical weight. She didn't change overnight. She had simply been showing me exactly who she was all along, and I had been too blind to see it.
realization was worth every penny of the heartbreak.
She pleaded, asking if there was any way to fix this, any chance to rewrite the script of our disaster. I didn't yell. I just held up my hands,
Phew.
showing her the calluses, the deep scars, and the engine grease that never truly scrubs off no matter how hard I wash. I told her these hands paid off her mountain of debt and placed a diamond on her finger,
Bing.
only for her to tell her friends that my blue-collar life wasn't good enough for her wedding. I let my hands drop, the finality of it echoing in the quiet garages. "We are finished," I said. She stood there, tears carving paths through her foundation, waiting for a crack in my resolve that simply didn't exist. Eventually, she retreated to her car, sitting in the driver's seat for 10 agonizing minutes, just staring at the dash. Then,
He drove away.
leaving nothing but dust in her wake. Raphael walked over from the workbench, handed me a cold bottle of water, and didn't utter a single word. He knew. I took a long drink, felt the cool liquid hit my chest.
Front and got right back to work.
2 months later, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt right. The house was quieter, yes, but it was also finally mine.
Views.
I cleared out the pretentious decor she had forced into every corner and replaced it with things I actually liked, making the space feel like a home instead of a showroom. I had successfully returned the engagement ring,
Think.
pocketing 8 grand after a small restocking fee. The jeweler didn't even pry. He just sighed and said he'd seen it 1,000 times young couples with big dreams colliding with the hard wall of reality,
Took that money.
and invested in a hydraulic lift for the garage. Deacon and I spent an entire weekend installing it, cursing, laughing, and nearly crushing his fingers, but we got it done. Now,
Tear down engines without ruining my back.
I even bought a 1976 Honda CB750 project bike just to fill the extra space, a complete mechanical overhaul that demanded every bit of my focus. At work,
Phew.
the crew had heard the story through the grapevine, but they were the best kind of friends. They didn't dig. They just cracked jokes and kept the pace. Raphael told me his first wife had left him for a car salesman,
Being.
and he called it the greatest tragedy that ever turned into a blessing. His second wife was everything the first one wasn't, and half the headache. My parents were different than I expected. Mom was furious at first,
Reason.
mostly because she realized she had been grieving the version of Blair she had invented in her head. Dad just shook his head, telling me it was better to find out now than 10 years down the road with kids involved.
Think.
They made sure I wasn't alone, inviting me over for Sunday dinners for an entire month, never pushing, just being there. Deacon was there every weekend too. Wed fish, work on the Honda, grill steaks that Blair would have turned her nose up at because they weren't fine dining enough. Deacon even started seeing a nurse named Alina he met at a blood drive. She was real, salt of the earth,
Please.
and she didn't have a single fake bone in her body. She actually helped me bleed the brakes on the Honda, laughing when she told me she grew up helping her dad in the shop. I told Deacon to keep that one.
Fess. Or he'd be the biggest fool in the world.
As for Blair, the rumors filtered down to me through Trevor.
Figted.
She had crawled back to her parents' house because she couldn't afford a single month of rent without my income subsidizing her lifestyle.
Feebles.
She hadn't saved a dime the whole time we were together. Why would she when I was paying for everything? Meredith was apparently livid, constantly reminding Blair how much money they had wasted on the canceled deposits.
Yoon.
Gerald was worse. He was just profoundly disappointed. Trevor told me he ran into Gerald at the hardware store, and the man just shook his head, saying he really liked that kid, and Blair had truly thrown away something golden.
After I sold our car.
Blair was stuck driving her mother's clunky 12-year-old Camry with a dented bumper and a broken Aka car she would have mocked ruthlessly a year ago. Kendall and Aubrey didn't cut her off instantly.
But it was classic, slow fade.
First, they were too busy for brunch. Then they had other plans. And after the rehearsal dinner disaster, the fade became a total block. They blamed her for the whole mess.
Feared.
claiming she shouldn't have been so transparent about the uninvite. Within a month, they had replaced her in their circle with some girl from their Pilates class, and Blair found out via Instagram.
Deal.
The hotel job turned into a nightmare for her, too. Danielle told Trevor that Blair was slipping, missing deadlines, and constantly showing up late. They demoted her, pulled her off the high-profile events, and 3 months later,
He was gone.
I assume they offered her the choice of quitting or being escorted out. She tried to reach out through mutual friends a few times, fishing for a second chance. But people were tired of the drama.
Thinged.
Danielle told her straight. Shed had her chance, and she blew it. I don't feel a shred of pity for her. She chose her path, and now she has to walk it. I hope she finds whatever it is she thinks she deserves.
He won't be from me.
She isn't my problem anymore. Guys, we are so close to hitting 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that button.
Thus reach this goal.
Thanks for being part of this journey and helping turn this dream into a reality.